Hello. On behalf of Dartmouth College and the Nelson A. Rockefeller Center for Public Policy and the Social Sciences, I would like to extend a warm virtual welcome to everyone today for the 2020 Democratic Gubernatorial Candidates Forum. My name is Jason Barabas, and I am the new director of the Rockefeller Center, as well as a professor in the Department of Government at Dartmouth. I graduated from Dartmouth in 1993, and shortly thereafter, I went into public service in Springfield, Illinois, working in the governor's office. So I appreciate personally the willingness of the candidates to compete for this important position in the state of New Hampshire. In the past, the Rockefeller Center has held civic engagement forums such as this one, in keeping with our mission to foster conversations around public policy at the national, local, and state level, as well as to promote public understanding of important issues of the day. This year, the Rockefeller Center is pleased to host the 2020 Democratic Gubernatorial Candidate Primary Forum, featuring State Senator Dan Feltes and Executive Counselor Andru Volinsky. They will be introduced shortly, but first, let me take a moment to introduce the moderator of our event, Professor Charles Wheelan. Professor Wheelan is a senior lecturer and policy fellow at the Rockefeller Center. Dr. Wheelan is a 1998 graduate of Dartmouth and holds a master's degree from Princeton University, as well as a PhD in public policy from the University of Chicago. He's a veteran of these sorts of forums, as well as many other public events at the Rockefeller Center, in addition to the public policy courses he teaches. And I should note that he just recently won a Dean's Award for Excellence in Teaching. Additionally, Wheelan has been a writer for The Economist and is the author of several highly accessible books on public policy, economics, and statistics, provocatively titled Naked Economics, Naked Statistics, and as well as a fictional novel that has been called a public policy thriller about a hypothetical global pandemic. This book, which is called The Rationing, was published months before these topics became part of our day-to-day lives in 2020. It is a thoughtful way to shine light upon many of the political, economic, and public health issues that we're all confronting. Wheelan has also vied for public office himself in a congressional primary in Illinois, and I can think of no better person to moderate a candidate policy forum such as this one. Professor Wheelan, thank you for serving in this important role, and please begin the public policy forum.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks to the candidates and for those of you who are tuning in. I will allow the candidates to have expanded introductory statements in which they can introduce themselves, but for now, we're privileged to have with us Dan Feltes, who is the state Senate Majority Leader, and Andru Volinsky, who is the Council Executive for District 2, which stretches from Keene to the Dover-Rochester area. Broadly speaking, the way this is going to work is that each candidate, by virtue of a coin flip, will begin with their introductory statements. Those will be 5 minutes. We'll reverse the order at the end for 2-minute closing statements. Between then, each candidate will have a chance to answer a series of questions, many of which I'll offer up, but I will encourage all of you to send in questions as well. Those will be 90-second responses. The candidates will hopefully stick to the time and we'll be able to cover a lot of material. For those of you who are watching, you have the chance through the Q&A function to send your own questions. Those will be fed to me. But if you like the questions that have already been asked, those will be elevated in the queue, and that makes it possible for us to ask the candidates the questions that are most commonly fielded. So with that, we'll get started. Senator Feltes, if you would begin your opening statement. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Charles, and to Dartmouth and the Rockefeller Center, all the students in particular, alumni, faculty, and staff. Thank you very much for having us, and thank you for listening in. I can tell you as the Majority Leader of the State Senate, the singular obstacle to meaningful bipartisan progress for all our families, all our communities, and the state of New Hampshire is Chris Sununu, and with your help, we're going to beat Chris Sununu on November 3rd. And I do have the privilege of serving as Majority Leader. I live in the south end of Concord on Hope Avenue with my wonderful wife, Erin, our 2 amazing daughters, Iris and Josie, our 2 dogs, Franklin and Roosevelt. And I have a distinctly different perspective and background than the current governor. You see, my dad wasn't governor. My brother wasn't a US Senator, and I was never gifted a ski resort. My dad worked in a furniture factory for 45 years, the same furniture factory doing the same job day in and day out in an unair conditioned furniture factory for 45 years. My mom, she worked part-time jobs, including the night shift, while raising 4 kids. And the gifts they gave to me were the values of hard work, honesty and integrity, and looking out for everybody, especially working families. Those are the values I've tried to live my entire life. Right out of law school, not taking a job as a corporate attorney, taking a job as a legal aid attorney with New Hampshire legal assistants for about a decade, helping low-income families and seniors, fighting for veterans to get the VA benefits that they need, they deserve, helping people protect their homes during the last economic crisis, the Great Recession, battling Wall Street banks for closing on folks all around New Hampshire, helping people get back up on their feet, including access to healthcare, unemployment, job training, and in my 3 terms in the state Senate, each and every day fighting for working people and working families, fighting on the progressive issues we all care about. And as majority leader, doing the same. And if I have the honor and privilege of serving as the next governor of the state of New Hampshire, each and every day I walk into that office, that's who I'm going to fight for when we replace Chris Sununu with some legal aid lawyer from the south end of Concord. And we got to, because we got a governor who doesn't get what ordinary folks are going through and doesn't get how to accomplish anything to make progress. We have the highest healthcare costs in the nation right here in New Hampshire under Chris Sununu. The second worst opioid epidemic with the second worst treatment capacity to deal with it. The highest student debt load, the 3rd highest energy rates. And we have a governor who's fixated on pushing taxes for big corporations down while property taxes are going up. And we need a different approach, and a different approach in conduct in office, giving out property tax credits and tax credits to Waterville Valley, his family ski resort, no bid contracts to corporate campaign donors. We need real reform to drive real results for ordinary people. That's why I'm honored to be endorsed in this race by End Citizens United, because we need reform to move forward for everybody in this race. And we've gotten results despite Chris Sununu. We got the biggest public school education budget in state history. Chris Sununu vetoed it, ultimately had to accept it. Chris Sununu is the barrier to education policy and just came out with quote unquote guidelines that leave it all up to our local communities on public health, and signed off on a report and sent taxpayer money to Betsy DeVos's consulting firm to do it. And we've made progress on solar, but the lone obstacle is Chris Sununu. He vetoed all of the bills on clean energy that we've sent forward of substance on solar, including my bill to advance new solar in the state by 7 times, not only vetoing it, calling it crony capitalism for the solar industry. I've been the climate champion in the state Senate. I've been the champion on campaign finance reform. I've been the champion on voter protection, endorsed by Let America Vote and the Voter Protection Project. And I've led the way in paid family and medical leave insurance, which Chris Sununu not only vetoed, he called it a vacation. And not once, not twice, but 3 different times. But this fall, we're going to give Chris Sununu a permanent vacation. Tonight, you're going to see distinctly different approaches from the 2 campaigns. Our campaign, a positive campaign, focused on lifting people up, not tearing one another down. Our campaign, a campaign focused on unity, not dividing the Democratic Party, because we got to solidify our support to move forward in our campaign, talking about real results for real people, the kind of results that we led on, and real solutions. You'll see 2 totally different visions and approaches tonight. And that's what you'll see. And I'd be honored to have your support and your vote in this race. And I look forward to the conversation we're about to have. Thank you very much.
Terrific. You nailed 5 minutes right on the dot. I like that. It's a good precedent.
There you go.
Thank you very much. Councilor Volinsky, your 5 minutes introductory statement.
Thank you. So tonight, I hope we talk about 3 topics: lowering property taxes, improving education, and no pipelines. We are in the midst of a COVID, economic, climate change, and racial injustice crisis. The time is now for bold ideas and courageous leadership. I was the Claremont school funding lawyer. I organized a team of volunteer lawyers that exposed how unfairly our public schools are funded and how the quality of a child's education depends on where she lives. We did more than just expose the problem. We convinced the New Hampshire Supreme Court for the first time in New Hampshire history to recognize a constitutional right to a state-funded public education. That was a bold idea. But because of a lack of courageous leadership, the promise of Claremont has never been fulfilled. That is why I am running for governor. Look, when I first went to Claremont, it was like going home for me. I grew up in a mill town where the mill failed. My dad was a mechanic and a maintenance man and a union shop steward. My mother, a homemaker. I'm the only one in my family to have gone to college. I went on scholarship. I paid for law school by working as a carpenter. I understand the difference that educational opportunity makes, and that is why I will never take the pledge. The pledge is a promise to fail. It chains us to the past. In fact, we've released a new pledge, the pledge to reduce property taxes for the majority of New Hampshire citizens. Look, over the course of the last 2 years, I helped conduct over 70 forums on how school funding works in New Hampshire. It's clear that there is a consensus of people in our state ready to move forward to a future that allows seniors to stay in their homes, that makes taxation fair, that allows young families and working families the ability to buy houses, and allows businesses to grow broadly across our state. There is a future that we can all participate in. And when I think about the future, I also think about climate change. My wife, Amy, and I are new grandparents. We have a 9-week-old grandson who we have never held. And I confess that when I think of climate change, I do it through the lens of a grandfather. I say the time for half measures is gone. There is no excuse for just one more pipeline. I'm the only candidate in this race opposed to the Granite Bridge pipeline, fracked gas, $400 million by the same company that tried to build a pipeline in your area, Lebanon to Hanover. But stopping the bad stuff is not enough. We need to move New Hampshire with its neighbors forward to a regional Green New Deal, and we need to make New Hampshire state government carbon neutral by 2030. Look, Chris Sununu has to go. He's the most cynical politician of our time. He vetoed paid family leave during a pandemic. He hired a DC Betsy DeVos connected consulting firm to do our school reopening plan. I'm the one who figured that out, and it became public yesterday during our council session. I've shown that we can beat Sununu. We stopped his hard right, rabidly anti-choice nominee for Chief Justice of our Supreme Court. We turned back 2 climate change deniers that Sununu wanted to lead key state agencies, and we denied Sununu the release of any money from the state treasury, absent revealing how he was going to spend the CARES Act relief money. My vision for New Hampshire starts with ending our extreme over-reliance on the property tax. There's a consensus the system is broken. We can move forward together. Join us, go to VolinskyNH.com. I humbly ask for your vote in the September 8th primary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So for the short questions, let's go in reverse order. So Councilor Volinsky will still be up. Obviously, the issue that is hanging over everything right now is COVID-19. It is a pandemic unlike anything that any of us has lived through. How would you evaluate Governor Sununu's response to COVID-19, and specifically, what might you have done differently? Councilor Volinsky, 90 seconds.
Thank you. Well, public health has to drive our decisions, and public health data should be the basis for those decisions. Sununu has been too little, too slow, too late. I confronted him at the beginning of April that we should issue an order that requires people to wear masks indoors in public spaces. Sununu said the public health data doesn't support that. That is not true. We need to issue that kind of mask order, just like Vermont and just like Massachusetts. We both have mentioned the reopening of schools. Look, the safety of our children should not be a political issue. We should be able to agree on a consensus approach that protects our children. It should be based on wearing masks, reducing density, keeping children outside as much as possible, and planning for the resurgence of the virus so that we're all ready to go to remote learning when it happens in the late fall. That's how I'd approach it. Businesses are getting more clear and explicit instructions than Sununu and his Betsy DeVos plan have given our schools. And so I want to be protective of our children and take the politics out of this COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you. Senator Feltus, the same question. Evaluate Governor Sununu's response to COVID-19 and specifically what might you have done differently?
Thanks, Charles. Well, first and foremost, he certainly does a better job at press conferences than Trump, but that's a low bar. And this isn't about press conferences and photo ops. It's about solving real problems for real people. New Hampshire, by any measure, has a worse COVID-19 situation than either Maine or Vermont, both in per capita cases and unfortunately per capita deaths. And we have over 300 Granite State seniors in a heartbreaking situation that have been lost to COVID-19 in our nursing homes, in a nursing home crisis right here in New Hampshire. And he hadn't taken any steps to deal with that crisis for about a month and a half. And the first thing he did is go out to a no-bid contract on testing to a corporate campaign donor that was wholly insufficient, didn't mitigate the problem, and didn't stop the outbreaks. We need to look at the problems and be honest about it with the public, at press conferences included. That's what we would have done differently. We would have dealt with the nursing homes, with the CDC guidance, both testing and PPE. Would have entered the Northeast Regional PPE Purchasing Partnership, which he failed to enter. Other states are leveraging buying power and getting PPE for their businesses right now and their nursing homes and their healthcare providers. We're not stockpiling it. We're not preparing under Sununu for the second wave. And we have, talk about schools briefly, we need a concrete school plan. Walmart just instituted masks in Walmart in New Hampshire. It's a sad state of affairs if you're safer in a New Hampshire Walmart than you are in New Hampshire schools. So we have to go forward in a concrete way, in a productive way, looking out for public health.
I'm actually going to ask you to follow up on that, both of you, but I'll have Senator Feltus continue, which is, let's talk in more detail about the school reopening, because we have pediatricians and other child advocates warning that it's quite dangerous for kids to stay out of school and deleterious to their development for a long time. On the other hand, teachers are much older and much more vulnerable, it would appear, than the young population. So can you talk specifically, Senator Feltus, about how we balance the safety of teachers and the families to whom children go home and the need to just get children learning again, or learning back to more effectively in some cases?
Sure, absolutely. So first and foremost, there needs to be clear and concrete guidance. And 6 weeks out from when school starts, Chris Sununu punted it all to local school districts, wash his hands of it. That's not doing your job. You gotta put out clear and concrete guidance, including what happens when a kid gets sick, including what happens with the buses, and dealing with social distancing. And I would propose, and I have proposed, making sure that states step up to the plate to support teachers and faculty by providing medical grade N95 masks to teachers and faculty. They shouldn't be paying for that out of their pocket. The average teacher in New Hampshire spends over $400 a year in out-of-pocket cost to do their job. We need to provide safety and PPE for our schools and our students. Mandate masks for middle school, high school, and on buses, and do what North Carolina did, which is provide 5 cloth face coverings for every student to start the school year. We can balance this if there is guidance. And you're absolutely right, Charles. The American Pediatric Society has indicated that, as what you said, and the CDC as well. But what happened here in New Hampshire is Chris Sununu completely abdicated his responsibility, provided no guidance to schools. And if he was going to do this, he should have done it 2 months ago and actually given our schools and our families an opportunity to plan. All our schools, our teachers, and our families want is certainty. And Chris Sununu just delivered complete chaos.
Thank you. Councilor Volinsky, please answer the same question. Specific thoughts on getting kids back to school safely.
Look, if you don't put resources with the things that need to be done in order to reopen schools, you just double down on the property tax problem. Local communities have very different abilities to pay for the things that are needed to safely reopen. So New Hampshire has 488 schools. Some are new, but many are older schools. What's the air exchange like in those places? No one's talking about the fact that there's an engineering standard. The air in a classroom should turn 2.5 times an hour. Are we testing the classrooms to see if they're safe, if they meet that standard? To the extent we can keep children outdoors and hold classrooms outside under a canopy, we should be doing that. We should then move indoors with the windows open and air exchangers. There are some communities in New Hampshire that don't have air exchangers in their schools, yet we're not talking about that. We're not putting resources aside for that. We know that the cold and flu season, in addition to COVID, is going to hit mid-October, mid-November. That's going to confound and compound the problem. And we're likely looking at a further school closure at that time. We need to be prepared for it. Let me add one last thing on vaccines. We hope to have one this winter. At the last council meeting yesterday, I asked who's in charge of that vaccine program, and Sununu and the commissioner of HHS did not know. That's a problem.
Thank you. Before COVID came along, the education discussion we would have been having is about whether we're giving our children sufficient skills to compete in a modern economy, and in particular, how we can close the gap, the vast inequities in this state. So could each of you speak, and we'll go in reverse order with Councilor Volinsky here. Can you speak about your plans to upskill New Hampshire students and narrow the economic gaps that have developed over time?
Well, my plan to improve schools is to fund them fairly. That's where we need to start. There are grave differences between schools in property wealthy communities and the rest of the state. 3/4 of our children now live in communities with below average property values, and their parents and their neighbors struggle to create and fund a 21st century education system. So I would start there on funding. I would then look to teacher recruitment and teacher training. We need to have a much more culturally diverse and racially diverse curriculum. And we need to have role models that are also diverse. In order to keep young people in our state, we need to drive down the cost of tuition. Too many young people, too many teachers, my son included. My son's a middle school science teacher in Denver. We need to lower tuitions in New Hampshire so that young people are more likely to go to school here and stay here and then go into the workforce. So I would do that. Community college needs to be free. We need to work towards that goal so that we can get our first 2 years of general education credits without cost and further incentivize students to stay in New Hampshire.
Thank you very much. Senator Feltes, your plan for providing the requisite skills to all New Hampshire children so they can succeed in a 21st century economy.
Thanks, Charles. And we need a cradle to career approach on education and workforce development, recognizing the best investments we make as a society are the investments we make in our kids. They pay dividends down the road, 10 to 15-fold. And it's not just Iris, our daughters, Iris and Josie's future, it's all of our kids' future. And they deserve a foundation for opportunity and success that's as strong as the granite under our soil. We need to build a bigger and better and brighter future for everybody. That starts with completing what we've started down, making sure full-day kindergarten is accessible. We finally did that in this budget. Christine vetoed it, ultimately accepted it. We need to end the reality that New Hampshire is one of only 6 states that doesn't provide support for pre-K. We need to do that in the next budget. We need to build off of this most progressive budget in state history for public school education funding and move forward with disparity aid for property poor districts, which is what we put in the budget for the first time in New Hampshire history. We also need, Charles, to work on job training and apprenticeships and unlock the innovation and the research and development potential, including the Upper Valley. We had legislation to do just that. Kristen vetoed it. But for graduating Granite State seniors who may not want to go to a 4-year degree, they have opportunities right now, and we need to work on, and I'm sure we will talk a little bit more about it, student debt. We have the highest student debt in the nation. We need to get a handle on it. We got some concrete ideas about that, and I'm sure we'll talk about it after this red sheet is shown.
Terrific. Yeah. Let me follow up. Both of you have spoken about things that are going to cost some money. The pledge has already come up, so let's stick with you, Senator Feltes. Have you taken the pledge? And if you could talk about your rationale for that position.
Well, I don't support a broad-based income tax, Charles. I know that some folks do, but what we did in this last budget is we made the most progressive budget in state history with the greatest public school education funding in state history in that budget. We did it by closing loopholes in our tax code for multi-state and multinational corporations, including companies like Netflix, which you may have heard of. And if you didn't hear of prior to the pandemic and the shutdown, you probably got Netflix. Netflix paid nothing prior to this budget. Neither did Amazon. They now pay. That's in part how we built a budget that was the most progressive in state history. We need to protect it and build off of it. So we've delivered results on this by closing loopholes for those at the top and big corporations. We're endorsed in this race by the chair of Senate Education, by the chair of House Education, by the chair of the School Funding Commission, and they endorsed us because we are delivering, not just debating this, delivering concrete results for our communities and reducing property tax burden. And Chris Sununu said after he finally accepted our budget that to superintendents of schools, he considers that funding one time. So we know which direction Chris Sununu wants to take us. He wants to go backwards on education funding. We need to win this election so we can go forward, protect that budget and build off of it. And I respect people who argue for a broad-based income tax, but 2020, in my view, is not a broad-based income tax year. 2020 is a redistricting year. The implications are not just for the next 2, they're for the next 10. And we can continue down the pathway of progressive budgeting to help our schools when we win this race. Thanks, Charles.
Councilor Volinsky, I think you've already answered the question, but if you could talk in greater depth about your rationale for that position.
Yeah, let's be clear. I refuse to take the pledge for the reasons I stated. Dan has taken the pledge. That progressive budget, guess where we are in the nation for state support for public education? We remain 50th in the nation in state support for public education, even under this progressive budget. 3 great governors, Jeanne Shaheen, Maggie Hassan, John Lynch, tried to close loopholes in order to solve school funding crises, and all 3 failed. There's no reason to believe that now, all of a sudden, there are enough loopholes available to make a significant dent and move us out of last place in funding for schools. Under Chris Sununu and under this legislature, the property tax has gone up $320 million, more than in any other time in our state's history. The legislature and Chris Sununu keep downshifting responsibilities, education funding foremost amongst them, to the local community. And that puts us in a position where there is so much unfairness. So many wealthy communities are able to avoid paying their fair share, while poorer communities struggle. We need to do a lot better.
There are a number of questions about specific issues that have come in advance and are coming in on the Q&A. So I think we'll work our way through some of those. We'll continue with Councilor Volinsky. The first is about the Granite Bridge pipeline. If you could talk about your position on that, and again, how you came to that position.
It's easy for you to say, right? So look, Granite Bridge is a $400 million fracked gas pipeline that Liberty Utilities would like to build from the seacoast to Epping to the north-south trunk line in Manchester. That south trunk line goes to Boston. Let's not be kidding ourselves why they're building that pipeline if they get permission. I oppose it because fracking is especially hazardous to the environment. Methane gas is released. It's 80 times more dangerous than carbon for climate change. $400 million is a lot of money. We will be paying that off. The ratepayers for Liberty Utilities will pay that off for 20 to 30 years. Look, the Public Utilities Commission has found that New Hampshire has sufficient capacity. And if we took a fraction of that 400 million and put it towards heat pumps and solar panels, we could take care of every affordable housing project that we can currently build or that we would like to build in New Hampshire. There is no good reason, and I worry about the future if we build this pipeline. No more pipelines.
Thank you very much. Senator Feltus, the same question, your view on the Granite Bridge pipeline.
Well, look, I don't think we should be critical of other Democrats on clean energy when Chris Sununu is a singular obstacle to clean energy in the state. Just like I don't think we should be critical of other Democrats on the most progressive budget that was crafted in state history, including the best education funding in state history. We just need to protect it and build off of it. The Public Utilities Commission is looking at this particular proposal. What I've said is if it's determined that it's needed to meet the home heating need in the state for natural gas and oil heat, which the vast overwhelming majority of Granite Cedars heat their home in the wintertime with either natural gas or oil heat. If it's determined to be needed, then I'm not gonna cut people off of natural gas heat. But this is gonna be decided in the next few weeks or next month or so. And the reason why I said that is because it's a sensitive issue to me. As a legal aid lawyer, I represented people who got their natural gas heat cut off in the wintertime by either the company or their landlord family to pay the bills. And they actually heated their homes, Charles, with their electric oven open. So when you talk about this, that's the perspective I take. And look, I gotta tell you, we have led on clean energy. Chris Sununu is the barrier to clean energy. So we need to win this race. I've led on community power, on community solar, on net metering, on energy efficiency, on distributed generation. And you know what? That is the barrier to moving forward. So, look, we got to focus on the concrete solutions that Chris Sununu has vetoed, preventing a transition to a clean energy economy.
Terrific, thank you. I have a follow-up. Let's just make this a short one, a 30-second question. Would either of you consider supporting a carbon tax, perhaps with a rebate to offset its regressive effects, and perhaps regional or national or at the state level? Senator Feltes.
Well, Representative Oxenham, who supports this campaign, had a piece of legislation in the House. I think they went a long way to crafting it fairly well. It didn't make it out of the New Hampshire House, but what we need to do is move forward on everything that Chris Sununu has vetoed. Net metering, distributed generation, energy efficiency, stuff that I've led on as a climate champion in the state Senate, stuff that I'll continue to lead on if elected and when elected, the next governor of the state of New Hampshire.
Terrific. Same question, 30 seconds. Councilor Volinsky, would you consider a carbon tax to change the incentives around fossil fuels?
A carbon tax was the subject of resolutions on over 100 community ballots this last round, and many supported it. I would support it if it was sent to me. I would sign it. It's part of a broader view that we need to take. But look, I'm not listed on the Granite Bridge website as a supporter of that project. I don't think there's any equivocation here about who supports and who opposes.
Thank you.
Charles, if I can.
Sure, I'll give you 15 seconds since that was invoked.
Sure. Look, again, as I said at the outset, I'm not interested in attacking other Democrats on clean energy. I'm interested in uniting us so we can move forward with the clean energy obstacle, which is Chris Sununu. And on none of these clean energy debates, Charles, none of them that I talked about earlier that I've led on, did we see Councilor Volinsky at any of them. So it's one thing, look, I was told by my mom that it's about showing up, not sounding off. So let's be real about the record here and about who's leading on combating the climate crisis. That's this campaign.
Actually, Charles, I think I get 15 seconds.
You have 15 seconds, and then we're going to move on.
Okay, I'm not a legislator, so I don't pass legislation, but I'm the one who stopped Sununu's climate change deniers from leading our environmental services agency and from leading the site evaluation commission that approves these big energy projects. So when things come before the executive council, I am the leader on climate change. Thank
I
you.
have another follow-up for both of you, and this will be a full 90-second question, which is I don't think it's terribly hard to persuade Democrats that we ought to move forward with clean energy, but it's a purple state. And as you know, around the country and around the state, there is fierce resistance. So my question for both of you, and honestly, I've forgotten who went at what order, so we'll go with Councilor Volinsky because I'm staring at you at the moment. But for 90 seconds, talk to me about how you can persuade those who are skeptical, not necessarily climate change skeptics, but those who are skeptical that we need to act aggressively on climate. How can you bring people around who are not necessarily the Democratic diehards on this issue?
Yeah, I think this is a radically moderate position that we need to talk about here. This is the question of our time. Is climate change real? I think the science is very clear on this, and I think smart, thoughtful people understand and accept that. So we start there, but then we look at the economics of it. How does money influence this race? Chris Sununu has taken more than $100,000 from Eversource. That has to influence his decisions. Mine is the only campaign that doesn't take fossil fuel money. And so we don't have that level of influence. I think when you look at the dollars and cents, rather than supporting a pipeline that would take us 20 years to pay off, you can make the argument to moderates and independents that we shouldn't support the shareholders of Liberty Utilities with this kind of large infrastructure project when we can make smaller investments and turn around greater return very quickly for the people of our state.
Terrific. Senator Feltes, same question. How can we sell action on the climate to those who are not the climate change faithful?
Well, real quick, it's not true. This campaign doesn't accept corporate money, so what was said just now isn't true. But here's what we do. We do what we did in the legislature. Bipartisan coalitions, leading as the majority leader. We've gotten bipartisan support already, Charles, on a whole bunch of pieces of legislation. It's Chris Sununu that vetoes it. He vetoed bipartisan net metering 3 different times. So we know how to cobble together these coalitions. We've done it. We have the record of doing it. And here's the argument you make. It's not just about combating the climate crisis. It's about clean energy jobs right here in New Hampshire. And it's about reducing energy rates. The reason why we have the 3rd highest energy rates in the country and the highest growing rates in New England is because of regional transmission costs allocated to the state of New Hampshire. And the driver of that is our peak demand relative to surrounding states. And when surrounding states do energy efficiency to shave peak demand, distributed generation, and solar, and we don't because Chris Sununu vetoed them, your rates went up. So you talk about rates on ordinary folks and families and businesses, and we talk about jobs. We're the only state in New England that lost solar jobs last year. Only state as a direct consequence of Chris Sununu's vetoes. So when I say Chris Sununu is a singular obstacle to bipartisan progress, clean energy is exhibit A. And Chris Sununu, all right, we're good.
We're good. Actually, here's a 10-second question because it came up and because it's rising on my Q&A queue here. Are either of you taking corporate PAC money? Just kind of a yes or no and maybe a 1-sentence explanation. Senator Feltes?
No.
And Councilor Volinsky?
Never have.
Terrific. It was a 2-second question. That's a pleasant surprise here. So let's go back to another issue that we were talking a lot about before COVID-19 is still a serious threat, and that is the opioid crisis. That came to the top of the list here. So if you could talk about your strategy for dealing with this devastating challenge, we'll go with Councilor Volinsky.
So look, I start from the position that access to healthcare is a basic human right. Sitting on the executive council, I've heard Chris Sununu say that he invented the hub and spoke system for treating substance abuse disorder. I heard him say that, and then I went to Vermont and met with the legislative leaders who had that system 5 years before us. And I talked to them about the shortcomings of that system. The shortcoming is there are never enough providers in the community to be the spokes. And part of that problem is New Hampshire, even after this last budget, has some of the lowest provider reimbursement rates in the nation. We gave providers a 3% rate. We need to do a lot better. Look, there is an approach to government expenditures that considers everything a cost to be minimized, when in truth, some governmental expenditures are an investment and you nurture your investments. New Hampshire had a nation-leading mental health system and we let it wither on the vine. We need to do better in investing in that. I spent 6 years on the Community Health Center board in Manchester. That's a federally qualified health center. I think that becomes the backbone for a lot of our primary care needs, and we need to better invest in it.
Terrific. Senator Feltes, your thoughts on strategies for dealing with the opioid crisis?
Thanks, Charles. Well, first and foremost, we have the highest healthcare costs in the nation right here in New Hampshire, in part because we haven't dealt effectively with behavioral health services, including treatment across the continuum of care. And the most expensive way to treat is in the emergency room. And it's just not right. It's not fair. It's not the right way to go. And those costs are spread over everybody else. That's part of the reason why we have the highest healthcare costs in the nation. So we need to deal with the opioid epidemic. We have the second worst opioid epidemic in the country, the second worst treatment capacity to deal with it. We need to pass paid family and medical leave insurance to make sure that people have a meaningful opportunity to get into inpatient treatment without risking their family's economic security. That's a bill I led on. Sununu not only vetoed it, he auctioned off a copy. It was vetoed at a partisan political fundraiser. We need to get addiction treatment services across the continuum of care. A bill that we sponsored and got a 24-0 vote out of the state Senate. Chris Sununu vetoed it, harming our addiction treatment capacity. Again, he is the barrier to bipartisan progress on so many of the key issues in our future, and especially on this. He had said the so-called Doorways program is working and it's doing great, despite everybody on the ground saying the opposite. I just had a ride along with Chief Goonan of the Manchester Fire Department, and we discussed this and talked about safe stations, which we funded in the budget. This is a real problem on the ground that's only being exacerbated under COVID-19, and we need to take these steps moving forward with treatment capacity across the continuum of care.
Another issue that people are writing about, upvoting, is childcare. We had a childcare crisis before COVID-19. We have a childcare crisis at present. It just happened to feel different. But what are your thoughts about easing the childcare crisis for working families? And we'll continue with Senator Feltus, then we'll go back to Councilor Volinsky.
Well, thank you, Charles. And Aaron and I are living this right now with our daughters Iris and Josie. We're fortunate to have childcare. Some parents don't even have childcare. If they do find it, prices are through the roof. This is an economic issue. It's an issue about not choosing between work and family. If you value work, you value family, you should value the proposition that affordable quality childcare is widely available. We've pushed initiatives, including in House Bill 1246, which is on Sununu's desk right now, to make sure that working families, working class families, have a meaningful access to the child care scholarship program, that they can actually afford it. And when Sununu did the whole reopening, Charles, the one thing he didn't talk about in all of that is reopening press conferences, first 2 or 3 of them, was childcare. And people were actually being called back to work in reopening without childcare, literally. And we need to get a handle on this. We got to advance the child care scholarship. We got to support our child care centers. And we need to make sure that we work with the business community to do so. And we need to make sure valuable programs like at NHTI, the Child Family Development Center, are stood up and maintained. I support the Child and Family Development Center at NHTI, and I think we need more of those kind of hubs for workforce development and for our working parents and our kids.
Terrific. Councilor Volinsky, your thoughts on easing the child care crisis for working families?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. This actually was the subject of discussion at my home yesterday morning. Our son's a school teacher. He's planning to go back to school in the fall, middle school science. His wife's a school administrator. They now have 2 children, 2.5 and 9 weeks old. And they're worried about how to pay for this. And they both have good jobs. I think this is part of a bigger picture of supporting families in New Hampshire, keeping younger families here, and developing the economy. So I would start with the childhood educators. They are some of the lowest paid workers in our state. If we had a $15 minimum wage, childcare workers would get a raise, and they deserve it. Paying for college, just about an associate's degree to be qualified as a childcare worker, that should be free in our community college system. Anyone who wants to go into childcare should have access to tuition-free childcare credits. As part of the bigger picture, we need to think about places like the center at NHTI. My wife Amy and I have been on the Merrimack Valley Daycare Board of Directors. I for 5 years, Amy for over 20 years. We understand how important this is in our state, and we think it should be a high priority for the next governor.
Terrific. The next question is not the most popular, but it's from one of my former students, so I get to be partisan here. And we had some people asking about it earlier, which is how are each of you actively supporting voting rights for students in New Hampshire? And obviously that's a big issue here on the Dartmouth campus. Councilor Volinsky?
Yeah, thank you. That was a good student. Look, before I ran for office, I was always one of the leaders of the Democratic Party's voting rights team in New Hampshire. So I always was assigned either to Dartmouth or to UNH. In 2008 on the Obama campaign, I was in court for the campaign. Voting rights is really important to me. Sununu says if you vote in New Hampshire, you need to register your car. I say if you register your car or you get a driver's license, you should automatically get a ballot in the mail and be registered to vote. We need to make registration easier. It can't just be at the town hall that's only open a couple of hours a week now during the crisis. Every state agency with clerical staff should be able to help you register. The idea that Sununu gets to pass legislation that creates a poll tax on students and encumbers their right to vote is unacceptable to me. If elected governor, I would quickly repeal that, and I would sign a bill for independent redistricting in New Hampshire. That is one of our biggest shortcomings right now.
Terrific. Senator Feltes, your thoughts on voting rights for students?
Thank you very much, Charles. When we talk about lifting people up, not tearing people down, we talk about fighting to include more people in our democracy and economy, not exclude them. We're talking about voting rights. We're going to make sure people have a right to vote. And we released a COVID-19 comprehensive voting rights plan back in April, portions of which we passed through the legislature. The first omnibus piece of legislation was vetoed. Hopefully the governor, the current governor, will sign the second piece that's on his desk right now to make sure that no one has to choose between the right to vote and public health. We need to repeal the voter suppression legislation, House Bill 1264 and Senate Bill 3, that's targeting students. And make no mistake, they're targeting students because students disproportionately vote Democrat. That's why, to be partisan, Charles. That's actually truth. And you know what? We've led the way on voting rights, on online voter registration, on automatic voter registration, on access to the ballot. We're endorsed in this campaign by Let America Vote and the Voter Protection Project. I'm honored to have their endorsements. Having led on these issues, I will lead on those issues when governor. We will repeal voter suppression, but that's not enough. We got to do automatic voter registration and employer time off for employees to vote. And expand and do mail-in balloting too. So these are the kinds of things that we need to do to make sure people have access to the ballot.
Terrific, thank you. I loved having a bunch of policy wonks logged in here because the question is just, it's like a policy class here. Marijuana, we'll continue with Senator Feltes. Is it time to decriminalize or perhaps legalize marijuana in New Hampshire?
Well, Charles, in the legislature, I led the way in decriminalization. We got that done. And in terms of legalization, recreational legalization, if three conditions are met, robust child protection, a fair amount of revenue going to the state, and a significant amount of that revenue going to the state to support addiction treatment services, those are three eminently achievable goals, then I support the legalization of recreational marijuana. The problem is, as Chris Sununu said, it doesn't matter what the bill looks like, and I'm not going to work with the legislature. That's what he said on marijuana legalization. So the barrier is Chris Sununu, and I've voted for different marijuana legalization legislation in the past, but the barrier here is Chris Sununu and his abject failure to work with the legislature. Literally, Charles, when I talk about the singular barrier to bipartisan progress, this is a bipartisan issue. There's bipartisan support across the aisle on this. And folks, if they just work together and pass common sense legislation in the reality that we're pretty much on an island on this issue in the Northeast, it's not just an issue in terms of economics it's an issue in terms of justice. And so in terms of moving forward, we need to move forward on this. If those three conditions are met, which they're eminently achievable, I support it.
Terrific. Councilor Volinsky, your thoughts on marijuana policy in New Hampshire?
New Hampshire is the only state in New England in which adult use marijuana is not legal. I don't have caveats. I trust people in the legislature to do it the right way. Bring me an adult use legalization bill and I'll sign it. And then I'll tax it to raise money for schools in New Hampshire. The other part of it is I'm a former public defender. My first 5 years at a law school, I worked as a public defender in the South and in Manchester. I understand the social and racial injustice of prosecuting people for marijuana use and possession. Black and brown people in our state are arrested at 4 times the rate of white people for marijuana possession. That is unacceptable, and we need to change that. No one should be in jail for marijuana possession. And those who have records, who have difficulty getting jobs because of a marijuana conviction, need to have those records expunged. On 4/20, we did a video and a fundraise for an organization called Last Prisoner Project that works to legalize marijuana and expunge and reintroduce people accused of marijuana crimes into society. I'm clearly for marijuana legalization.
The number one question, and I've saved it for near the end here because Governor Sununu's name has come up so often, basically is why do you think that you can beat him? He's had a lot of publicity with COVID. He's relatively popular among independents. So for each of you, starting with Councilor Volinsky, why do you think that you are uniquely positioned to defeat Governor Sununu?
Well, here's how you beat Chris Sununu. You start out by making him defend the property tax. As I mentioned, the property tax has gone up $320 million during his term, more than during any other governor's term. So you start there. Then you make the most clear contrast you can with Sununu so that voters have a choice. Chris Sununu hasn't met a pipeline project that he didn't like. And so if you're unclear where you stand about the Granite Bridge pipeline, you have a hard time making a contrast with him. If you demonize anyone who talks about putting all of the revenue systems on the table for discussion, all options on the table, then you fall right into Chris Sununu's trap. Chris Sununu has beaten 2 pledge candidates in a row. There's no reason to believe that a 3rd pledge candidate would do any better. I think you take the fight to Sununu on these issues, on his use of the LLC loophole to finance his campaign, on his taking $100,000 from Eversource, on his creating an opportunity zone that benefits his own family. These are the issues you go at Sununu and you go at him directly. And I think I'm the right candidate to do that.
Terrific. Senator Feltes, your thoughts on why you're the guy to beat Governor Sununu?
Well, I don't think that advocating or having a long history of advocating for a broad-based income tax is going to be very productive in a general election. I think we ought to close loopholes for big corporations to fund property tax relief and fund education and healthcare. Chris Sununu looks out for big corporations. This is about whose side are you on? Are you on the side of the haves or the have-nots? We know where Chris Sununu falls. We know where he gives his no-bid contracts to. We need to ban no-bid contracts. He gives them to his corporate campaign donors and to his family and to his friends. And he gives Waterville Valley an opportunity zone designation while property taxes are going up. We talk about the fact that he has no record of accomplishment, literally. Highest healthcare costs in the nation, 2nd worst opioid epidemic with 2nd worst treatment capacity to deal with it. Property taxes going up, energy bills going up, highest student debt load in the nation under Chris Sununu. And what has he done? What initiative has he put forward that has gotten into law, including during the Republican legislature? His top initiative was so-called right to work to weaken collective bargaining rights of unions. And he couldn't even get it through a Republican legislature. So he wants to run for re-election, a rare 3rd term as governor with that record. Good luck. So let's talk about the record. He doesn't have a record. And you know what? We have in this race, we're well positioned to win this thing because we have record fundraising in our race without corporate contributions, corporate PAC money, and without LLC money, record fundraising in this race. And we have 12 labor unions on board, End Citizens United on board, Steve Marchand, Molly Kelly, and Colin Van Oosteren, and we have a broad coalition.
Thank you. The other serious issue, and this will probably be the last question before we get to closing statements, the other major issue that is taking America's imagination at the moment is racial justice and policing. Obviously, in New Hampshire, we are a far less diverse state than most of the rest of the country, and yet what should we be thinking about in terms of that subject? Senator Feltes.
Well, thank you, Charles. Look, whether subtle or overt, caught on tape or not, every day our Black brothers and sisters face words, actions, and policies that rob them of the American dream. And we're up on the 4-month anniversary of the killing of Breonna Taylor, and her killers have not been arrested. And an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And it's on all of us to battle systemic racism. Chris Sununu actually said systemic racism doesn't exist in New Hampshire. It does. It exists everywhere. And it's not enough to be not racist. We all need to be actively anti-racist, which is why we've propelled in the state Senate common sense criminal justice reforms. I was the lead sponsor of bail reform. I was the lead sponsor of a number of initiatives dealing with housing. As a legal aid lawyer, I battled housing discrimination all throughout the state. Honored to have the support of Manchester NAACP former President Wooler Lett in this race. And I've proposed creating an Office of Racial Equity within the governor's office so that we can identify systemic practices and eradicate them and work to include communities of color in key decision-making in state government and make sure that we recruit and get ideas for people for key posts in state government that reflect our diversity. We got to do that. And that office, by the way, looks a lot like what happened in Vermont, what they did in Vermont. So these are just some of the initiatives to move all of us forward on this key issue.
Thank you very much. Councilor Volinsky, what should we be doing in New Hampshire to advance racial justice?
Well, thank you, Charles. We have to first start with the admission that systemic racism exists in New Hampshire. Chris Sununu denies that. We have systemic racism. We have overt racism. In 1991, the Klan held a rally in Rochester. In 2017, a young boy was almost lynched in Claremont. On Memorial Day weekend, a Black man was stopped for having an out-of-date inspection sticker. His window was busted out by the police. He was tased and pulled out by the hair. This happens in New Hampshire, and we need to deal with it. Black Lives Matters, about 2 weeks ago, issued a list of 7 demands. I very quickly and wholeheartedly endorsed those demands. And then I explained to the Black Lives Matters leaders that we need to go further. I think of racial justice in a couple of categories, starting with law enforcement. New Hampshire's fortunate to have a single police academy. We can demilitarize the police training at that academy and introduce implicit bias training. I underwent implicit bias training in 2017. It was really important to me. We should do it with police officers. We need to diversify our police forces across the state so that we're recruiting from places outside of New Hampshire. We need to work on access to healthcare. The fact that Black and brown people have disproportionately bad outcomes under the COVID situation is unacceptable. We need to do a lot better on that.
Terrific. Well, I want to thank you both for working through a very long list of very substantive issues and sticking brilliantly to your time allotment. Very disciplined on that point. We'll now go into the closing statements, 2 minutes each. We'll reverse what we did at the beginning. So Andru Volinsky will begin the end, 2 minutes, and then we'll have Senator Feltes. So thank you, and please conclude your thoughts.
So first, thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Rockefeller Center, for having us. We're all Dems. We have more in common that unites us than divides us. But the differences are important. And so I've mentioned the differences on the pipeline, on the pledge, on confronting Chris Sununu on property taxes. Property taxes go up $300,000 a day. That's happened with Dan as majority leader and with Chris Sununu as the governor. We need to change that paradigm so seniors can stay in their homes, so that young families and working families can buy homes, so that we can broadly develop businesses across the state, and so that we can have affordable housing everywhere it's needed in the state. We need to make contrasts. Look, I never had to give back LLC money in this race. Mr. Feltus took LLC money from his campaign treasurer. I understand why they made that decision. Nick Taylor, his campaign manager, told NHPR that that was an intentional decision to raise money. My campaign has smashed the record on the number of contributors. We have more contributors than any gubernatorial race in the history of gubernatorial races in New Hampshire. I'm very proud of that. That's why Ben and Jerry have endorsed me, and they're naming an ice cream after me. It's called Volinsky's Courageous Crunch, and it's because of my positions on campaign finance. We can beat Chris Sununu, but the way to do it is to make clear contrasts and to make him defend the property tax. So again, thanks everyone for having us tonight. I really appreciate this opportunity. September 8th is the primary. Please consider voting by mail because it's safer, and I humbly ask for your vote. VolinskyNH.com. Thank you so much.
Terrific, thank you. Senator Felts, your concluding thoughts.
Well, at the outset, we talked about approaches. I said that our campaign is based on unity of Democrats, not attacking Democrats. I think you just saw a closing argument that is in charge, in chief, and attacking Democrats. That's not the way to go. And then talking about, some project that's going to be done in about a month or two, and basing your campaign on that, and basing your campaign on our campaign making a mistake and giving back some donations. Folks, we're in a global pandemic. Let's get serious here. And we're going up against a governor who has a record number of vetoes of legislation that we propelled. We have ordinary people who are struggling every day. We need to focus on that. That's what we're focused on. And I got to tell you, this is key right here. Real reform for ordinary people. A system right now that is rigged for those at the top, that Chris Sununu is taking advantage of day in and day out, which is why we put forward real reform, advocated for real reform, and we're endorsed in this race by End Citizens United. And so I respectfully ask for your vote and support. But more than that, I ask you for your activism. Everything you do and say counts. I'm reminded, and I quote an activism from then apartheid South Africa from Bobby Kennedy, who said, each time someone stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope. And through many acts of kindness and activism, those ripples, they turn into waves, and those waves can shake down the greatest walls of intolerance and injustice that still exist. That quote on activism, it was true then, it's true now. It's even more true now, especially in the current environment. So we need you. We need you active and engaged. Stay active and engaged on all the issues that matter to you. Let's keep fighting. Be safe, be well. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks to both of you for your public service and for engaging, being in the arena in this very challenging time. On behalf of the Rockefeller Center, thanks to all of you who tuned in and sent questions. That's all for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Our pleasure. Be well. Stay safe.